Hello everybody, I just wanted to do a quick lecture. I'm going to discuss morality and values as they're relevant to social work in a general way. So first of all, before we move on in this course, it's important that we're on the same page with our definitions. So there's all sorts of definitions for these words. For the sake of this class, as far as morals go, think of that as kind of your general umbrella ideas about right, wrong, good, bad, sort of black and white non-negotiables that we generally might have. Values, on the other hand, are a little more specific and they have more to do with your priorities and preferences. So we all have different values. Some people, many people value family or freedom or self-determination. And the difference between most of us is that we prioritize those values differently. So for some people, family is number one. For other people, freedom is number one. For other people, honesty and truth is number one. So you can see how that quickly creates differences between us. And also, our values are very much learned through where we come from. Maybe our family has taught us values. Maybe personal experiences. These are things that we're kind of experimenting with our whole lives that become really intrinsic to who we are. So we all have our own personal values, and then we also have, in social work, specific professional values, which are different than personal values because they're already outlined for us and they're defined for us. So when we talk about values in this class, we also want to let people know, hey, my personal values are in conflict with this idea. Whereas, we can also discuss our professional values are not in conflict with this idea. For example, death with dignity or physician-assisted suicide. The NASW is pretty clear on self-determination and has released a lot of statements about end-of-life care that essentially say if a client is determined to end their life because of a terminal illness or prolonged suffering that would occur because of self-determination, as a social worker, regardless of your moral stance about physician-assisted suicide or your values that are relevant to physician-assisted suicide, your role, social work's values, is to respect self-determination and to support them through that process. Now, that also brings us to ethics. So in that situation, our ethics are codified. As I said, the NASW has released standards about end-of-life care. So ethics are basically values and morals codified for tangible use. So we're taking some kind of abstract ideas and writing them down, creating standards. Those are our professional ethics in the context of this class. Now, laws, another great example, death with dignity or end-of-life care, are obligatory and enforced by threat of punishment. So Arizona has specific laws to death with dignity. We don't have death with dignity laws here, so physician-assisted suicide is not yet legal. Now, that doesn't mean people don't go to a different state to get that kind of care or treatment, but it does mean that in Arizona, this wouldn't be possible for a client yet. This could change or might be changing right now. Things do all the time. So as a social worker, what you couldn't do is say, hey, I've got this. Well, you could do anything, but it wouldn't be ethical to break the law and say, get your client, a way, a means to obtain physician-assisted suicide that's underground or against the law. Now, we could get into some real intense arguments about whether or not that would be ethical, but the fact is you'd be breaking the law and you could be held liable for your actions. So that's where the law comes into play. Now, I'll talk more about when breaking the law is ethical and unethical later, but right now we're just going through some definitions. All right, so an ethical dilemma. This is when we've got two alternatives and both of them are going to result in something that's undesirable. So an ethical dilemma isn't, I don't feel good about this situation. That's more your kind of personal feelings around an event that's occurring. If you have a client that's really interested in physician-assisted suicide and you're in a state where physician-assisted suicide is legal, and that's the decision they've made, you're not really facing an ethical dilemma there. Now, you might have some personal feelings about whether or not that's moral or correct or in line with your religious values. And to you personally, that outcome may be negative, but that decision is out of your hands. The client's making the decision. So you're not really faced with an ethical dilemma there. Now, an ethical dilemma, for instance, would be a situation where both of the outcomes are negative. Say, I have a client who's minor that's telling me they're feeling really suicidal and they're going to hurt themselves. And if I tell their parents, they're never going to talk to me again and they're never going to go to therapy ever again. So as a social worker, I have to weigh my options there, right? I have two options. One is to do what I have to do, which is tell the parents, your child is feeling suicidal, I'm concerned about their well-being, etc., and risk the fact that this adolescent may never talk to me or another therapist again, and our rapport will be completely destroyed, which might cause further harm down the line. Or I don't tell the parents, and I'm basically risking my license. I would be risking the chance that the adolescent may actually hurt themselves, and I would be held accountable. So neither of those options are very good, but in that ethical dilemma, I have to weigh those options and choose the one that would be the most appropriate based on decision-making models. So don't worry if this is a lot. We're going to go into the details of examples like this, but I want you to understand what an ethical dilemma is. Two alternatives, neither of them are very good. As we go, I also want to remind everybody that we're going to take a sort of cultural approach to everything we talk about in this class. This is really important for ethics, and I think this chart kind of conveys why this is so important, because there's so many different aspects of culture: greetings, communication, dress, appearance, the way we eat. And this chart isn't perfect because it references mainstream American culture, which is kind of a odd thing to say, but it's the best I could find for us to kind of get an idea of what I'm trying to say here, which is the way we shake hands, our indirect communication, the way that we're dressed, the way that we eat, and the significance of what we're eating. These are all things that we talk about in ethics. Maybe you have a family who is making sure that their children are fasting, and somebody comes to you at a school and says, I'm seeing signs of neglect. These children aren't eating at lunch. If you don't have that cultural understanding that that family's religion or belief means that they're going to be fasting for long periods of time, you could easily make a report that might impact the family in a really negative way and make them perhaps change their ideas about who social workers are and whether or not they can trust them. So that's one small example of a cultural thing that can impact us ethically. Even things in regard to time. Sometimes with clients, if they're late, if they don't show up to appointments, if they maybe aren't in agreement to our treatment plan, we take that as a sign of disrespect when that has to do with our cultural values more than the treatment of that person. So these are all things that we want to think about as we're talking, our values, our norms, etc. And then these are a couple more issues relevant to class, our mental processes and learning style. And as always, if you see something in our lectures that's difficult to understand or doesn't fit with your learning style, I'm not perfect. Absolutely, please reach out to me. Let me know how I can make class easier and more understandable for you if you have a learning style that isn't fitting with what we're doing here. All right, so ethical problems arise when there's a conflict about alternative decision options proposed by participants because each makes alternative assumptions. Let's break that down. Alternative decision options can mean a lot of different things. We make decisions all the time. As soon as we assess a client, we're making decisions about what we write down, what is relevant to that assessment, whether we need to talk to them about their trauma or not. Everything we're doing is making a decision in that moment. So that can reference us individually as a social worker or what the treatment team is deciding. So the second part, there's a conflict about alternative decision options, maybe let's just say like a treatment plan, for instance, the best form of care for someone, proposed by participants. Participants means different systems. So I'm a part of the system, I'm a social work, I'm a participant in care. We've got our client participating in this decision. We've got maybe their family, we've got their employer, we've got their insurance company. These are all groups with competing interests at the same time that are involved. Because each of these participants makes alternative assumptions. So each of those stakeholders, the insurance company, the social worker, the client, the family, has different assumptions about what the best course of action is. So referencing back the example of death with dignity or end-of-life care that involves physician-assisted suicide, maybe your social worker, your client's family is extremely against this decision, but your client definitely wants to do it, and their insurance company isn't going to cover it, so they have to pay out of pocket. So you're working with all these different people who are making assumptions about what the best thing is to do. So this is when ethical problems kind of arise.